Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is the host of the multi-award-winning Zestful Aging Podcast, an interview show heard in 104 countries. She is also the author of Not Just Chatting, How to Become a Master Podcast Interviewer. Nicole's guests are change makers from various disciplines. Filmmakers, writers, advocates, poets, musicians, scientists, athletes, and entrepreneurs, many of whom are top experts in their fields. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Nicole Christina.
Hello. So nice to be with you.
Nicole, interviewing a master podcaster should make me nervous, but I'm just going to chat with you like we're old friends because This is an author's, not a podcaster's interview. You can give me a grade later.
I would not do that, but we can certainly talk about some of the skills that are helpful if people are considering podcasting.
Well, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I'm going to probably have a little bit of a different answer than some of your authors who may have always wanted to write. I've always loved writing, and I've done blogging and written for different publications, but I am still a full-time psychotherapist, and I do my podcast. So it's not like I was thinking, when am I going to write my book? I was thinking, when am I going to go to the grocery store and get dinner on the table? I wasn't really thinking of a book. But after I started my podcast, I was aware that some of the interviewers were not really perhaps connecting with their audience or their guests in a way that I thought might yield more interesting material. And I'm a psychotherapist, so I have maybe a little bit of I don't know if I want to call it, more experience. I've been a psychotherapist for 30 years, but I interview a lot of people. So and at the same time, I have an adult son who was going through some real trouble with addiction. And I think for me, I wanted to throw myself into a project that I was interested in, but also really took my mind off some of the stuff that was happening with my son. And so it was a great distraction from what was going on in life. And I also was aware it was a real niche because I don't think there is another book specifically on podcast interviewing. So I thought, listen, I got a lot to say. So it was kind of a combined motivation.
Well, you certainly took the time to learn the process yourself. So before you wrote the book, that is always very important, and the research needed for any book.
Yes.
After listening to my podcast, many of my author guests ask if they should create a podcast for themselves. What do you advise in the book about whether this is the path for someone?
Well, I think you probably have your own opinions as well. What I would say is it has literally changed my life. I mean, I already loved my work. And my life wasn't bad, but being able to talk to people about things that I really care about, and talking to people who frankly are so, running with a crowd that I would never meet ordinarily. Is I have so many pinch me moments that I can't, it's like my baby. And I've seen people who talk about their podcast and we're both like, oh, you just love your podcast. But what the other piece is, and I'm sure you have had this experience, it is a lot of work. And for every hour or for every episode, it's right. And I don't know how it is for you, Julia, but it's about 4 hours to get things. It looks easy. But there's a lot of background work. I would say, and people have different opinions, but I could not do this without an editor. Now, I have a clinical practice, but I am not a detail-oriented gal, and doing all that editing and uploading into this and to that, I would be really not good at it. And I know what I'm good at. So my advice, take it or leave it. Some people are great but I would try to find an editor and someone who can assist you in doing the background work. Would you agree with that, Julia?
I absolutely do. Everybody thinks podcasting is like I used to think about owning a restaurant. I enjoyed having people in my home and I wanted to cook for them. So why not open a restaurant?
That's a great analogy. And, in my book, I start off saying, everyone now has a podcast, and we sort of think that if we're good chatters and we're good hosts and we can be kind of the life of the party, that we're also going to be good podcasters. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, you need that, but that's not all you need. Yeah. So I think that's a great analogy.
And it does take a lot of time and a lot of money. And until you reach a lot of people and have a lot of subscribers, you can't monetize your podcast. So it does cost a lot of money if you hire a sound engineer. Sometimes I can pay $800 a month, for this sound engineer to edit my podcast. And so I decided to take a course. And I just had a course on editing my own podcast. And it is so difficult. I don't know how they do it, but it is so tedious and so difficult.
It's tedious. Yes. Oh my gosh. Do you use Audacity?
Well, I was trying different programs, but I have decided they are well worth the money that they charge.
It's not fun because you're not listening to a conversation. You're listening to these choppy little, bits.
Yes.
And I think you really have to like detail-oriented work. And that's not my jam.
No, cutting out somebody's call for clearing their throat is
it's not as fun as you might think.
No. Well, once you wrote this book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to use a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I hired a book coach and I self-published with her excellent guidance because I think I went into this pretty ignorant, like, hey, I know I'm a good writer. I'm going to write this thing. It'll be fine. And again, much more complicated than I thought and detail oriented. And, she's saying, well, I need a 15-word summary. I need a 30-word summary. I need 100. I'm like, oh my gosh, what? But she knows her business. And then I hired an editor. And that was a humbling experience. And so, and then and it's on Amazon, and I've been able to talk about the subject with other podcasters in conferences. So they'll have me come on and talk to other podcasters. And because of COVID, it's mostly been virtual. But I look forward to the time when I can travel and talk about what it's like to be, a podcast interviewer, because it's just really fun.
And it's become your calling card as well. You can take that and meet those people and speak to people at conferences. It really does open a lot of doors for you.
It's been a wonderful way, as you say, calling card. I participate in the Senior Olympics. And so I've gone to Florida a couple times. I'm going to be going to Pittsburgh. I'm a tennis player, although last night you wouldn't know it because I was really not playing well. But, I always have cards with my podcast and how you reach me and all of this. And I give them out in the most random times. Like I have someone renovating my bathroom now, and he's in his early 60s, and I can tell that, he's the kind of guy who would like my interviews. I said, here's my card. I gave a woman, I was in a thrift store, and she was talking to me about how she loves to volunteer and why, and she plays the pipe organ. I thought, yep, you're my people. And so, I order them by the thousands, and I keep them in my purse and my tennis bag when I'm walking the dog. I try not to be too pushy, like, hey, listen to my podcast. But people seem to be open. They say, oh, yeah, I listen to podcasts, or I have no idea how to listen to a podcast. And then I'll kind of take them through the process.
I find the exact same thing happens. And I think that people will listen, but they don't want to click on that little button and subscribe. So we have a lot more listeners than we have subscribers, especially on YouTube. And I've talked to different people about that, and they say, oh, yeah, I've got lots of podcasts saved on my devices, but you're right. I've never subscribed.
That's interesting. I don't have a huge YouTube following. And I don't really, one of the concerns, I don't know if this has been an issue for you, but when you're dedicating your work to people 50 and over, sometimes they just aren't as computer savvy, right? So if you're trying to say, listen to my podcast, sometimes they say, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So that is a bit of a challenge.
And that's why I've put my episodes on my website. They can go to my website and click on an episode and listen there.
Yeah, I do that as well. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the passages you've brought to share today, and then read a few paragraphs for us to hear your tone and voice in the book.
Oh, okay. I'd love to. So it's really not a big book because it's just about, certainly there are books about podcasting that are really big, and some of them are wonderful and I've read, but my expertise is the interview part. So I'll read a passage from chapter 6, which is the anatomy of a great interview. The most important and often most demanding part of interviewing is deeply listening. Most of us think we are good listeners, but ask yourself this: when was the last time you had an uninterrupted, undistracted conversation for more than a few minutes? That kind of conversation has become so rare that a typical psychotherapy session can feel antiquated and a bit disorienting. In our distracted world, listening has become a thing of the past. It might be interesting to note how many times you feel heard and how many times you are giving your full attention while someone is speaking. So this is what I really try to do. And it's one of those things that is so simple, but it is really hard. And I am also guilty of it. Sometimes if a guest is going on and I'm sort of losing my, I'm thinking, okay, did I defrost something for dinner, or like, you know, something like that. And one time, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this, I was checking my Facebook because it was just not, I wasn't engaged. So to me, the most important part and also the most difficult and demanding part is to really be 100% focused on that moment and what you're doing. And the reason that's so important, well, there's many reasons, because they can also sense that, but then you know exactly the next question to ask. You don't have to go on a script because it's obvious. You're also listening for inflections. You're listening when your guests may kind of get upset or choked up, and then you say, do I want to go further with that, or is that something I feel like would not be respectful? So for me as a therapist, I'm always kind of trying to feel out, okay, where's the emotional impact, or what is going to help them go deeper? Because what I don't want is a bunch of sound bites. To me, there's nothing more frustrating and frankly kind of boring. And so my hope is to get beyond just sort of the typical, this is why I did it. This is, that kind of thing. I had a guest once who was on TV a lot, and I could not get underneath those sound bites. It was like she was so rehearsed and it was so slick, and I tried. I'm usually pretty good at it, but that's rare. So I guess that's, sort of the big takeaway, and it's challenging for all of us who are, we've learned to be distracted, and it's difficult, but I think it makes for a really different experience for your guest and your audience.
Well, I think that listening is a lost art, not just on podcasting, but in real life. I went on a trip with my grandchildren and I just watched those faces on those screens, so I think that that's so important for all of us to delve into those listening skills and to try to hone those a little better and to teach our grandchildren how to have a conversation at the table without a device nearby.
That's right. I mean, it's really had a huge impact on our culture, and some impacts we don't even realize. I mean, they're doing some scanning of brains for teenagers who are on the screens, and it's not good. Even the people who develop these programs don't really let their kids stay on screens very long. So that tells you something.
Do you Google yourself or read reviews? And if so, how do you deal with the bad ones or the good ones?
That's a great question. I don't Google myself. I got mostly, positive reviews, but there was one review that just was so funny. She said something like, her voice is so annoying, I can't even listen to it. Not really? That's, why would you bother? Just don't listen. I haven't gotten that yet. I don't Google myself. I'm sort of in my own little bubble, I guess, and I just do what I love to do. And people seem to respond well to it. I get a lot of positive feedback from my guests, and they say, "Oh, that was a lot of fun," or "I've never been asked that before." And I say, "Yeah, I get that a lot." And that makes me really happy.
Yeah. Do you have any other books in you?
I am so in love with doing this podcast, and my hope is to be kind of the Terry Gross of healthy aging. I think more I'd be interested in having a show on either on public radio or something like that. I think that's my next big step. In terms of the writing, Even though I love writing, I don't want to say no, but I think I'm much more focused on how can I take this further and increase my listenership, because these are really lovely conversations and they really bring an optimism to aging that challenges the narrative of slowly decaying. And I think that's really important, and I'd like to bring it to more people. So that's really where I'm focused right now.
Well, I think that's very important to decide where we're going next with this because, the old podcast fade, they say, is about after 10 episodes. And you and I have certainly passed that long ago, but I'm going to have to get back to writing books instead of spending all my time podcasting.
Yeah, if you're doing 4 a week, I mean, my editor would have my neck if I was doing it. But sometimes I was talking to a podcaster, we were joking, we're like, it's like crack cocaine. You just not that I know what that's like, but I just like love doing it so much that especially when there are people who have been formative in my education as a psychotherapist, and now I'm talking to them. Like Peggy Orenstein is a great example. She just, I interviewed her in her last book of Boys and Sex, and now she wrote a book, a memoir about aging. And, I kind of grew up with her in grad school as a social critic and journalist. And I'm like, we're chatting about yarn, and it's intoxicating to me. It's just intoxicating.
It really does energize you. I think being on the podcast with someone, you're so concerned that you want to make them look good and you don't want to, make the podcast something they would not be proud of. So you have to be real careful with that. So when I get off the podcast, I'm sweating bullets, because I've been on point for so long. But I think it does energize you. And that's something that is a good combination with writing if authors want to find a niche market. And you've certainly found the one for our audience because we're all over 50 and we're some of us far over 50.
For sure. For sure. It was interesting though, that is the bulk of my audience, but I was looking at my analytics and there were some 20-year-olds and I thought, what's happening here? And I think it was aspirational or like, what do I do about my mom or grandparents or whatever? But I was shocked to see that I have some millennials listening, that you never know, right? And I just imagine, these interviews going out all over the world and how they might impact someone's life. I mean, you just never know. And it's something beautiful about that mystery to me.
I agree. And I'm so proud that they would listen in. I think your podcast title, Zestful, makes us all want to be there because we all want some zest in our life.
For sure.
We're called the sandwich generation, where we've still got younger children and we're caught between younger children and elderly parents. And so there's a lot of information that you have in your podcast that's so vital to all of us.
Yeah. And one of the things I talk about in my book that I've alluded to, I don't invite people on that I'm not really fascinated with. I mean, fortunately, I'm at the point, I've been doing this for 5 years, that, I get solicitations. Some of them are really inappropriate. I had a guy who kept saying, I want you to be on your show. I do mold remediation. And I thought, really? Because I'm pretty sure you'd have never listened to my podcast. The Zestful stuff is really, I think, important. And that's what it really is all about. I mean, even the research supports trying new things, even though it's uncomfortable. Really taking the opportunity to, it's a different stage of life. There's losses, there's certainly challenges, but walking that tightrope of also like, wow, I'm not making lunches for my kid or going to PTA, whatever. I have a little more time. I can travel now. It opens up some possibilities that weren't there before.
Well, my husband always says you're retired and yet you don't have any time to do any of those things. You're sitting at your computer, either writing or podcasting. So come and let's go travel a little bit.
That's great. I mean, I think too, like, I'm like you, where I would do 4. I did in the beginning. I was just like 4. Yeah. But I got such a long lineup for people to go up. I started feeling a little bit bad because they were like, when's my interview going up? Oh, 6 months, and I thought that might have felt a little bit disrespectful. So I kind of had to push myself to take less guests.
Well, that's what I'm about to do. I'm going to just have 2 a week and launch 2 a week, but the backlog still pushes you out several months. So people do get a little anxious, but I've been on other podcasts where, their length of time before you actually see your episode is pushed out several months.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, I usually have about, now what I'm comfortable with is about 10 in the pipeline, because what I try to do is have a variation of ones that are difficult topics and ones that are fun topics. So I try to make that variation. So I always have enough that I can pick from to provide that. Yeah.
Well, Nicole, as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite a unique set. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
I guess what I would say is to just really enjoy the process, and it's something that I felt very grateful to be able to do, and it was a joyful experience most of the time when it wasn't tedious. And I guess what I would say is, really enjoy the fact that, even if you self-publish or whatever, I mean, yay for you to do this after 50. I think is something it's a zestful thing to do. It's something to be proud of, even if, the world never sees your book. I think it's kind of a beautiful thing to do at this age when perhaps you have some wisdom and some you can look back and say, what have I learned? I guess I would hope that we would appreciate what we're bringing into the world.
I certainly agree. And I think that's great advice. And we're just so excited to now count you in our authors over 50.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.